Hey, welcome back to the Broker's Voice. I am excited because I get to have one of the good ones on. I am joined by one of the best in the industry. I think I get to call him a friend. He's a good man, Chris Hamilton with Hotchkiss Insurance. Chris, welcome to the Broker's Voice.
Hey, Andy, thanks for having me.
Oh, this is going to be a fun conversation. Now, if you're watching this on Monday on LinkedIn, this is one of the very few times that I actually will pre-record a Broker's Voice, but we're doing it because of a very special occasion. Chris lives in Fort Worth, Texas. And if you're unfamiliar with the NCAA scene, Fort Worth is where Texas Christian is, who is playing in the national championship tonight if you're watching this on Monday. So Chris is headed out to LA to watch the national championship game for a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Chris, I want to make sure I have this right. I got my Wisconsin shirt on, but is this the Horned Frog? Is this how we do it?
Yep, you got
it. So, well, what's your prediction for tonight? Let's start there. Are they going to pull off the upset?
I think they are by 7.
Okay, we're going to go 7. I will tell you, as a fan of college football, I probably got to believe most of the country is rooting for TCU outside of the southeastern part of the country. And so it's going to be a fun game to watch. Well, let's get into your career. You know, you and I were talking offline. You haven't always been a benefit advisor. There's 2 angles I want to go with this per our conversation offline. In fact, I was just down in your neck of the woods on Friday shooting some content with Spencer Smith, who we both know, and I was with a good buddy of mine, Kareem Cade. And your name came up in conversation because Kareem was talking about how his agency changed the day he hired a good buddy of his from grade school, a good childhood friend who came from the economics finance world. And Rob came in and said, Kareem, the way you guys do it in the industry is all messed up. The healthcare finances are all messed up. You got to change how you're doing. You can't just be spreadsheeting this stuff. You have a similar background in that you came from banking before you got into this industry. Talk about how, we'll even go back farther than that in a minute, but talk about how your career in banking has really helped you today as a benefit advisor.
Yeah. So, I worked with the same type of companies that I work with today, mid-market companies. And, really as a banker, whether you're financing an acquisition that they're making, equipment, working capital, whatever it is, you really have to understand the ins and outs of that business, how they compete, how they make money, all of those sorts of things. And a big component of that is understanding risk inside of those companies and expenses and margins and those sorts of things. And so naturally, because healthcare is so expensive, or health insurance is, it came up in some of those conversations. And so that's really one of the things on top of ACA being passed that caused me to really start digging in and looking at it.
That's awesome. Now let's go back even farther, because in college you were an economics and finance major.
That's right. Yeah.
And I was a finance major myself. In fact, I had dreams of being a stockbroker at one time. And I unfortunately graduated right at the time of the stock bubble back in 99, 2000. But you made some comments about how economics and finance combined have a very large impact in what we do as benefit advisors. Talk about that. I loved how you said it.
Yeah. So when you think about economics, and I had a number of professors in undergrad and graduate school that talked about this. I had some really good professors, and when you break economics down to the most simplest form, people think it's math and numbers and all that, and which it is. It's quantitative, but at its most simplest form, economics is the study of human behavior to incentives and disincentives. And so really it's like psychology. It's like how are people going to respond when you do something? And so, when you think about healthcare and health insurance, there's all sorts of incentives and disincentives out there. And really, if you just take kind of a 30,000 foot view of the industry, once you figure out what the incentives are and realize where maybe some of them are misaligned, if you can correct for that, you can get a different outcome.
Yeah, I love that because I truthfully, I probably have never thought of economics and finance relating to each other that way. One is the behavior towards incentives or disincentives. Finance is the numbers side of that, how to use the numbers to drive that behavior.
Well, not only that, really finance, all finance is cash and how are we going to pay for something. And so the economics is understanding what are the drivers and what's happening as far as incentives and disincentives. And then you figure out, once you can adjust for that, then you figure out what's it going to cost and how do you pay for it. And that's the finance piece.
Which has 2 very big ramifications in what you do today, right? Because I think a lot of people in our space today know the disincentives and the incentives, or perverse incentives, when it comes to the healthcare and health insurance systems. But at the same time, what you're saying there is actually, as an advisor, how can I use economics to try to create a certain behavior from the employees
That's right.
through incentives so that they make better decisions about their healthcare, and which is going to ultimately improve the finances of that organization's bottom line.
Yeah. So really, if you haven't heard of this before, just you can search Porter's Five Forces, and it's a strategy or a concept by Michael Porter. He's written entire multiple books about this. But really, when you think about an industry, you want to think about who the competitors are. The cost of switching and suppliers and power of all these different folks in a particular marketplace. And what I did one night is I just sat down like, okay, let's think about the healthcare side and then the health insurance side. Who is everybody that's involved in the entire process? What's their incentive? What's their angle? How do they make money? And what do they want to see happen over the next 5 years? And it can be something as simple as just a couple of bullet points under each one of those things. But once you look at that and kind of whiteboard it or map it out, it's super eye-opening to figure out what our clients want to have happen and what everybody else in the industry wants to have happen. It's not the same thing. So then the question becomes, can I design something that replaces each of these people that have a perverse or misaligned incentive with something that actually aligns with what the client wants and what we want? And then that's really kind of the genesis, if you will, of what it is that we do now.
Well, and you've done a fantastic job of creating incentives and making sure the right alignment is being incorporated into a company's health insurance plan to help drive better outcomes and lower cost. I'd love for you to tell the people watching this. I thought this was such a powerful story. You and I have done some work together, and I asked you, what really drives you? What lights you up? What's that problem that really gets under your ass to go out and solve? And at first you said misaligned incentives.
Yeah.
And we dug deeper and deeper, but all of a sudden you started telling the story of your brother.
Yeah.
And how what you watched your brother go through really has driven what you do today. If you're willing, share that story.
Yeah, so I do talk about my brother now more frequently. It was kind of a private situation, but I openly share the story now because I think everybody can relate to it. It resonates with people because it's either happened to somebody in our family, ourselves, a family member, a colleague, a friend. Somebody has had this happen to them. But my brother got sick, and he was sick for several years, and it caused him to spend tens of thousands of dollars out of his pocket. And it really it took all of his savings, and it kind of ruined him financially. And when I think about his particular situation, he worked for a Fortune 500 company that worked with a big national broker, so they should have been able to provide top-notch health benefits. And I'm sure on the surface the benefits were good. And I looked at his benefit package and it seemed pretty status quo, just right down the fairway. But the problem is when you get sick multiple years in a row and you just think about the average American, right? I think statistics say that, some high percentage of folks don't even have $1,000 in their bank account, right? So what happens when somebody ends up 3 or 4 years in a row hitting a $5,000 or $6,000 max out of pocket because you're sick? It takes all of your savings, you liquidate your 401k, you put all you can on credit cards, and then, at some point you run out. And that's what happened to him. And the really ironic thing to me, and I had been in the industry for a number of years already, but I literally had a client that was just down the street from the company that he worked for in the same industry that was a fraction of the size of them. They weren't a small employer, but they weren't massive either. And what they had figured out was how to control the cost of healthcare, the unit-based cost of healthcare. So what is it that when we pay, when we go buy medications, when we buy surgeries, and when you talk about incentives, this employer really leaned into this. And they said, look, employees, if you're willing to make good choices and help us lower the cost of your healthcare 50, 60, 70% on a unit basis. So if you're taking a drug that's $1,000 a month and you let us help you get it for $300, we'll give it to you for free. If you're willing to use the hospitals that we have contracts with so that when you have a baby, we're able to save 50 to 80% on that claim cost, or hip replacements or imaging or whatever it is, we'll give you that healthcare at no out-of-pocket cost. And the craziest thing to me when I look at this particular employer is what they spend per person per year for insurance is almost half of the national average. Half. And so in this particular employer, they give their employees direct primary care, which is basically concierge medicine, no cost to the employee. and you can have your baby, your hip replacement, your expensive medications. If you go through the right channels, your cancer treatments, if you go through the right channels, you can have it at no out of pocket cost to you. And they're able to give that away to their employees. And in my mind, it's just mind boggling because, the big national employer, I mean, there's any number of reasons we can speculate as to why they don't do it. But if anybody could do it, it's them. But they either don't know how or they don't have enough incentive to do it. But it's powerful when you look at behavior. Andy, it's going to cost you $5,000 a year to have your treatment. But if you go over here, here's the same quality or better, but it's free. Which one do you want?
Yeah, it's and I've said this for a long time. Americans love the word free. And we're not saying healthcare is free. What we're saying is not only is the employee getting access to that care, that level of care with no out-of-pocket cost to him or her, they're able to do it at a lower cost because they're going to a better quality of care. And I think that's something a lot of people don't understand. And that whether you're an employer watching this, I'd even say some advisors still don't clearly understand this. Yeah, you can actually get better healthcare at a lower price. And there's something you said there, Chris, I don't want to go overlooked. The program, your client, whose costs are half the national average, have DPC, direct primary care. Now, again, we've been talking about DPC now for a few years, but still, if you're unfamiliar with it, it's essentially a better gateway to the healthcare system. Yeah. You agree with that statement? I mean, talk a little bit, maybe I don't want to go down a rabbit hole here, but talk about, if you could, for the folks who may not clearly understand, what is the benefit of DPC?
So we talk about incentives and conflicts of interest. When you think about what's happened on the healthcare side, and I'm not talking about insurance, just the healthcare side. When you look in just about any city, the hospitals have gotten really smart. They want to control the referral pathway into their facilities. And the way they do that is they've gone out and they've purchased physician groups, primary care, specialty, imaging centers, physical therapy. They basically have become fully integrated healthcare systems. And the conflict is doctors that work inside, they work for the hospital system, or they're affiliated with the hospital. When they need to refer a patient for imaging or surgery or any sort of treatment to a specialist, it has to go through their integrated network. They don't have independence anymore to refer to whoever they want. And then the way care is managed and administered is different. So I always compare doctors that work in the traditional system to car mechanics, because everybody's had a car worked on, probably. When you go into a car mechanic, they can only charge you for the work that they do. And the more things that they do, we changed your oil and we changed your brakes and we they list out all these things that they do. The more they put on that invoice, the more they can charge you. And so the incentive is for doctors in a traditional model, how can we get you in and do more things so that we can bill more? Whereas, contrast that, the other side of the coin is direct primary care, commonly referred to as DPC. They no longer work in this what's called fee for service. They work on a subscription basis. So you pay a flat amount per person per month, and you have unlimited access to these physicians in person or virtually. And their incentives are now changed from how can I get Andy in and do as many things to him as possible to what's the appropriate treatment. And then when Andy needs something, who's the best person out in the marketplace to do it? I'm not just sending them to the hospital-owned doctor. I'm sending them to the one I think and feel is the best suited to handle his case. And so what you see in the data is that you actually have a reduction in overall claims expense, because they know how to use the plan. They know where to send people, and you don't see this overutilization of testing. A lot of doctors in these facilities are tied to facilities. They kind of CYA. It's probably a 1% chance it's this, but we're going to run the test. It's $1,000 just to rule it out, versus common sense approach to medicine. Let's rule these other things out first. So you see less utilization and more appropriate use of testing.
Yeah, it's, and I think if you're a broker listening in right now, doing the right thing for your clients requires work. And I think this is something we're going to be pushing against a lot harder in 2023 is, we love working with advisors, Chris, like you, who want to put the work in. But as an advisor, if you want to create the results that you're hearing Chris talk about and anybody else in the industry, you got to do the work. It requires work. It's not just going out and shopping 4 carriers and thinking magic's going to happen to your client's bottom line. You got to do the work. So this leads me to where I really wanted to go today, Chris, when it comes to doing the work, social media.
Mhm.
You know, you are an example of somebody who is leveraging social media. People mainly see you on LinkedIn, but using social media to create brand awareness, to
Mhm.
help serve your mission, and quite frankly, to drive business. And let's start with the Chris Hamilton before he
Yeah.
was active on LinkedIn and other platforms. What were your hesitancies at first?
I just by nature, I'm kind of a private person. I never had Facebook when it came out, or Instagram, or whatever the social platforms were at the time. I just kind of like being private. Um, and I don't know if this stems back to my upbringing or what, but I'm always just kind of been a private person and never really wanted to have a spotlight or attention. And so it seemed to me, I just didn't want to have my face out there for whatever reason.
You know, it's interesting that you brought that up because I too feel like I'm a private person. And I think, tell me if you had the same epiphany, because now you're out on a daily basis, right? You're on LinkedIn
Mhm.
creating content. And I think it's important to note, if you go look at Chris's content, it's very different than what you see from most in our industry. He's there to perform. He's there to drive business. He's not there to become LinkedIn popular. And I think for me, Chris, that was that recognition. Truth be told, I don't love social media, but I knew I had to be on there to drive business because it's where my buyers are going to be going more and more.
Mhm.
And did you have that? Did you have a similar epiphany or realization that, like, yeah, okay, if I'm going to have success, social media has to be part of my strategy?
Yeah, I think I had a number of competing interests and limits on my time. When I think about how when I first got into the industry, I already had an established Rolodex of people to call on that I had relationships with, I'd done business with in the past. And so, the first 3 years, it was working with people that I already knew, and then working through centers of influence and getting referrals and calling people and whatnot. But then when I moved into somewhat of a practice leader role and became responsible for, manage various management requirements, it just sucked a lot of the time that I would spend working with clients and trying to develop new clients. And I had to figure out how to leverage my time.
Mm.
And so, for any of the advisors that are out there today, when you think about the demands for your time, it probably limits. You only have a limited amount of time to try to establish new relationships. And there was only so much time I could spend calling. But then I thought to myself, and really with your help, it was, what if I could take the time I would in one day to make calls, create a piece of content that may be seen by thousands of people? How long would it take me to make 2,000 calls or 20,000 calls? Forever, right? But I can create a piece of content that may get viewed 20,000 times. And, the 20,000 viewers of that content, not all of them are my prospective market. Maybe only 5 or 10% of them are, but that's 200 people that saw it. That might be so. It really, the idea when you explain it to me that way, it was like, okay, maybe there is something to this. I just kind of have to get over my hesitations, if you will, to do
So
it.
let's go. I'm going to ask you like a 2-part question here. There's
Yeah,
the first part is strategy. Second part is more
mhm.
mentorship. Strategy. So when you create content today, not that I'm going to ask you to give away the secret sauce, but if you
That's anything.
when you create content today, who do you have in mind? And what's your goal? Like what drives the content you're going to create when you think of topics and subjects and things like that?
Yeah, you know what? People ask me that all the time. How do I come up with what I'm going to post? And I keep a journal, and when I have ideas, sometimes it's while I'm working out or walking or listening to music. Like, oh, that's an idea. Let me write that down. But really, somebody asked me a little differently, like, how do I measure what I'm doing and if it's working or not? And I don't look at the metrics. The way I got over my hump of my hesitation, as I said to myself, I'm only going to create content that I believe in, that I want to talk about. And I know there's probably things I could talk about that would be more popular, that might get more views. But for me, what is it that I really feel like I'm doing? And what am I passionate about? Because if I'm passionate about it, I'm probably more likely to stick with and be more consistent with doing it. And so there are certain, if you look through the content that I create, you're going to see a few veins, if you will, that I hit because those are topics that are very important to me. And if they happen to resonate with a broader community, that's awesome. But if they don't, and it only lands in a few people's eyeballs, that's okay too. This is kind of, in my opinion, how I do it.
And what I love about your content too is the end user in mind is your prospects.
That's right.
And I think it's important. I'll never forget. I had Seth Denson on one of my early episodes of The Broker's Voice, and I made a comment as I introduced him: the best kept secret in the industry. And he said, "That's music to my ears because I'm growing a personal brand for my prospects, not my peers."
That's right.
And I thought that was so profound because I preach it every day. You're on LinkedIn for performance, not popularity. And
That's
the
right.
content that's actually going to work is the content that's not popular because you're just speaking to your prospects. That's all that matters.
Yeah, and the one thing I have noticed, because I have established a number of new relationships through LinkedIn, as I go back and look just at some of my posting history, my prospects that I've developed new relationships with, they don't post or comment or like anybody's stuff. They're like silent observers. They just kind of lurk in the background. And
But they're
I
watching.
asked one of my newest clients that I actually met through LinkedIn, um, how we got connected, and he mentioned how he started following my content, and then that caused him to reach out to me. But I just made the comment to him. I said, "Well, it doesn't look like you ever liked anything. You've not posted anything. If you look at his post history or what his activity, doesn't have any." And he said, "I learned years ago that if the moment that I start being active on LinkedIn, I just get blown up by everybody and their mother from every industry wanting to sell something." And I thought, oh, okay, maybe my other prospects are the same way. I don't, that's just kind of my hypothesis, if you will.
You hit one of the nails on the head, Chris. The people who actually end up reaching out to you will never ever like or comment on your stuff. And I just heard a statistic, and I know I'm going to absolutely butcher it. I want to say for I forget how many millions of people are on LinkedIn today. I want to say 20% actively create content. The other
Hmm.
80 just digest it.
Okay.
And that's an important note to mention or to reference because one, that's real estate for you if you're a content creator, but know that most of your prospects are only there to consume. They're not actually creating content themselves, but they're
Yeah.
watching. And that's what you're learning. You're starting to develop inbound leads because of that content. And that's what's fantastic. So quick part 2 to this mentorship. What
Okay.
advice would you give if there's a younger broker listening who has been wanting to get on social media, but again, has that hesitancy, maybe a little fears about what people might say? What advice would you give him or her?
Um, well, nothing is ever going to be perfect. I had hesitation about posting something initially because, okay, well, am I going to get criticized for this, or is somebody going to shoot a hole in it, and make me look stupid? And I actually kind of welcome that. I mean, that's actually been one of the benefits I've found by posting content is that, uh, you know, people are pretty open to debating things or asking questions, and maybe there's people out there that criticize, but it actually helps hone your craft.
Mm.
And the piece of advice I would give to somebody is don't let perfection be the enemy. Um, just start. Find something that you're passionate about. Find a topic or something that you feel competent in, and just start with that, and then branch out from there.
And you got some great feedback. I think you said from clients and or maybe COIs and prospects that the content they love the most is when Chris is sitting right there at his desk in front of his window hitting record.
Yeah, it's interesting because I actually went into a studio and tried to create some content, and I've kind of posted it out there a little bit, little bits and pieces of it. And I've asked some of my closest clients and partners within my firm and other folks in the industry, like, hey, which of these do you like better? And it just overwhelmingly, people have said like the concept of when you just flip your camera on and just start talking. It's like, okay, well, that's actually not hard.
Yeah. And I
So
want to, I don't want to, you mentioned a studio. We're going to give a little shout out to a friend of ours, Spencer Smith. You and I have both spent time in a studio. I was just there a few days ago. Fantastic. If you're a broker, by the way, that wants to create some of that high level content in a studio setting, please
mhm.
connect with Spencer. But to your point, what we're realizing is people love when you just hit record on this.
Oh yeah, yeah. There's the barrier to entry is if you're seeing this, you've already crossed the barrier of entry. You have the
Yeah.
ability to create something.
100%. Well, I want to thank you, man, because, we get a chance to work with a lot of great people, and people I often get asked, Andy, who has success with your programs and who doesn't? Like, what's the difference? And I give an answer they don't want to hear, but it is the answer. And that's the people who put in the work get results.
Yeah.
And the people who are consistent get results. And you are one of the shining examples of that, Chris, of somebody who just puts in the work when no one's watching. On a daily basis, you're on LinkedIn with content. And I told you offline, you're starting to get inbound and you're still at the beginning of the momentum you're creating with this. So it is going to be exciting to watch where you take with this. And by the way, most people in this industry are starting to get a name or starting to know who this Chris Hamilton guy is because they're seeing him everywhere.
Well, I'm trying to bring awareness to what it is that we do. And I'll mention a couple of things really quick before we go. You mentioned consistency earlier. And then initially it was to educate my ideal prospect or ideal client what it is that we do. I've heard from so many people, for the last several years, well, I've never heard of this before. Um, it's almost like they're skeptical because they've not heard of it. So really, one of the benefits I found of putting this content out there is that it helps them become more familiarized with it. And the other thing is I'll have people that ask questions about a particular topic if I'm in a meeting with them, and I'll direct them to the LinkedIn page that the clip. And the thing that I love is, I mentioned I tell the prospects this, look, I put this out into the universe where there's millions of people that we all know people love to criticize. So let's just go see what the criticism of this is. I put it out there intentionally for people to try to shoot a hole in it. And maybe there's something I'm not thinking about, but it's been helpful from that. But then the consistency piece is the other big thing. I think, really I picked up from you is like, it doesn't matter if you post something once or twice. It's, can you do it 200, 300 times? And that's really how you hone it. And I was reminded of this in the fall. I was taking the kids in the park, walking my dog, and it was like a really busy morning. There was like a gazillion birds. It was like I was in an aviary or something. And but you could hear this, and my kids were like, what is that? And I was like, that's a woodpecker. And like, what's he doing? He's just pecking in a tree trunk. And I just kind of made a joke to the kids, and I was like, hey, you hear all these birds that are flying around chirping, making all this noise? I mean, they're laughing at the woodpecker. And I was trying to turn this into a lesson for them, but it ended up being a lesson for me. I told them, I said, these birds are laughing at this woodpecker for pecking his beak into this trunk of a tree. How stupid is it to do that? You're not going to be able to get a nest doing that. Just build your nest in the limbs or whatnot. But what I said to them was, that woodpecker is just consistent. He's just repetitive. He's persistent. And eventually he's going to burrow out a hole in that trunk. And you watch. It's the fall right now. But later on, when we get deeper into the fall, into winter, we're going to have some storms that roll through. And the birds that built their nest in the ends of those trees, when the limbs break off, because they do every year, they're not going to have a home. But that woodpecker is going to get the last laugh. He's going to have a safe and secure home. And so it just reminded me in that moment, I was like, you could apply that to so many different things in life.
So my challenge to you, Chris, I'm giving live coaching right now. I want you to develop a keynote talk, and it's going to start with the story of the woodpecker.
The woodpecker. Okay.
You're going to do a talk on consistency and the power of consistency, and you're going to share the story of the woodpecker. That is awesome. That is the best way to wrap up this episode. Chris, thank you so much. I was going to finish by saying this. The way we do business has changed forever, especially since the pandemic. Mm-hmm. And I have a client right now who's reading the book Fanatical Prospecting by Jeb Blunt, Sales Gravy. Fantastic book. And I asked him, I said, hey, Mike, when was that book written? And he opened the cover. He said, 2015. I said, did Jeb put an addendum in the book that said what to do when a pandemic hits? No, nobody did. And though it's a fantastic book, the way we sell has changed. Mm-hmm. But the beautiful thing about that is we can actually build relationships now with prospects before we ever meet them.
Yeah.
And that's what you're doing on LinkedIn.
I hope that's what
Well,
what I'm trying to do.
I can tell you with a guaranteed yes, you are. So, Chris, with that being said, I want to thank you. We are recording this on Sunday prior to the Monday. Go have fun. Like I said, most of the country is rooting for the Horned Frogs.
Go
We'd love
Frogs.
to see
Give them
the
hell,
episode.
TCU.
TCU would be a fantastic story for college football. So have fun, my friend. Thank you. For everybody else listening, please take note of this man. Go look at what he is doing, model what he is doing, be as consistent as he is, and you will have the same success. Take care.
Thanks, Andy.